Somebody asked me in one of my lives if I would do a review of Israeli combat footage, so that's what I'm going to do. This is going to be done in a reaction style format, although this isn't really a reaction because I've already seen all of these videos, but I am going to be on the screen looking at it as you're looking at it. I had to go through and make sure that the things that I was putting together, clipping together, was relevant in regards to tactics, techniques, or maybe even some procedures. I did do a little bit of research, and I also put in a few other videos relating to some concepts that are not the IDF. Just to give you some things to think about. If you have seen these videos, I'm sure I'll point out some things that you haven't seen or maybe give you some information that you don't already have. So a few things here is one thing that you'll see throughout the video is them pre-firing before going into rooms or before actually identifying a threat. And as you look into this room, there's a bunch of rubble, there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, and typically, you know, it's not uncommon to find people hiding in places like that, looking for an opportunity to shoot you and also not be seen or shot themselves. And so, you know, I understand that in Israel, this is a mass hostage situation, and some of the things that you'll see actually throughout the video is not only the pre-firing, but also throwing grenades, right? Which you wouldn't do like if you were going after a specific hostage situation, trying to recover hostages, because you're less accountable for anything that could happen. But I think it's fair to say that they're in sustained like gun battles with, you know, enemy people. And so they're pretty sure that these hostages at this point are not, you know, hiding in these peculiar places and have been taken somewhere. And it's far more likely that they're going to encounter what I just explained, which is a bad guy waiting to ambush them, basically. So as he gets to this doorway here, right, you know, I think traditionally when you think about CQB, you think about taking rooms, you know, as quickly as possible. And my question would just be, how would you do this, right? How would you take this room right here? There's a curtain or there's a sheet or something draped across the threshold. It looks like it's pinned to the door, maybe in some way, or secured. It's nailed there. So how do you do that? Do you duck under it and then the two guy comes in and tries to cover his sector? Do you, as you're moving through, try to rip it down, which may not work, right? It might be secured very well that your own momentum in your own body isn't going to allow you to do that. And then are either of those two options really effective anyways, right? Because both of those scenarios take you off of your ability to identify and mitigate threats and takes you kind of farther away from marksmanship. And there's no guarantee that either of those two things are going to work. And so you just see them working the threshold here, trying to, you know, assess and do what they can to collapse the room down from the outside before actually doing anything. And I would say, like, if you came across this situation and you had to go in this room, you would probably do all of that work and then try to remove that thing from impeding your movement, and then make a decision to go in at that point.
One of the pillars of CQB, which is violence of action. It's generally understood or generally taught that there's three pieces to CQB. Traditionally, these three pillars are speed, surprise, and violence of action. Violence of action is not, in my opinion, running through the house with your hair on fire, rappelling down from the ceiling in ninja costumes. That is not violence of action. Violence of action refers to the moment in time when you are trying to overwhelm an angle of exposure that you're not currently exposed to with an angle of attack. So it's basically the application of sudden explosive force. So violence of action is a momentary thing. It's something that we apply when necessary.
One of the things that you're going to see throughout this video is constant pressure. You know, and when he talks about momentum, and especially in combat situations or even sustained gunfight situations with bad guys inside of structures and law enforcement, and this is what happens, is you might get yourself into a situation where you're at a certain point and now things are so bad that it doesn't make sense to continue to push forward, right? You know, recently there's a video going around now where I think a few officers were killed and the U.S. Marshal was killed, and this individual is shooting at them from a you know, I think a window on the second story, and these officers are pinned down behind a car and they're trying to do work, they're trying to do what they can, but there's no momentum happening, right? Because it just doesn't make sense. There's nowhere to actually go to, and I don't even think they completely understood exactly where the guy was shooting from.
We combine momentum, which is what people really mean when they say speed. I'm not a fan of moving fast. I'm a fan of creating and maintaining momentum. Momentum is the constant pressure that we apply inside of a structure. We don't even necessarily have to be moving to apply that pressure. Simply standing outside of an open door, applying your flashlight to an area can deny it to some enemies.
So what he said was applying constant pressure. So we don't even have to be moving to do that, right? And, simply standing there holding on an angle, of restricting a bad guy's ability to come around the angle and hurt you is applying pressure.
That is momentum. You are forcing them to do what you want them to do. When we combine momentum with violence of action, we create the element of surprise.
When you combine momentum with violence of action, you create the element of surprise. I really like that because I think how people understand surprise is nobody knows you're there, right? And in most cases, especially in law enforcement, that's almost never the case, right? So even if we're talking about a hostage rescue situation where, let's say, an individual is holding somebody in a room and we're already in the house, well, in law enforcement, if there's no reason to go rescue that person right now, then they know we're there. We're talking to them probably for hours. But at the point in which it's time to launch the rescue, can you use the element of surprise? And I think so. In that way you can, because we are going to use our momentum and the violence of action to influence the element of surprise. Maybe they had taken gunfire from this specific building, or maybe they haven't, right? And this is obviously the difference between combat and law enforcement, things we do or don't do. But one of the things Nir Maman said, the Israeli soldier that I had in my last podcast, he talked about this as a tactic of something they do where they're shooting at, windows to force the bad guy from having the opportunity to come outside of the window or present himself, his weapon, and fire at the soldiers here. Now, if there are bad guys in there, which is probably safe to assume they are, this is dividing their attention. This is keeping them busy, keeping them occupied, and just giving them more things to think about. I do wonder how long you could actually continue to do that for, though, because if you look around, there's just buildings all over the place. You'd have to get a resupply and download mags probably every time you hit a building if you were doing this. So again, this is obviously a combat situation, but kind of speaks on the speed part. We're going through a hole in the wall that's leading us to a narrow hallway or alleyway covered by rubble and other things that we have to navigate. So how fast could you actually move through this little space and also be effective while you're doing it? Obviously, if nobody's there trying to hurt you, then it doesn't matter. You can move as fast as you want, but that could become problematic if we're delayed or we're further away from marksmanship and somebody's actually ready to hurt us. So in this video here, pre-fired before going in or starting to go in, I don't think the video actually finishes. And one of the things is a lot of these soldiers have on a lot of equipment and gear, backpacks. And so obviously being cumbersome and not having the ability to maneuver physically your body quickly is a problem. And this doorway kind of looks small. It does seem like he kind of gets hung up on it. And Again, just how effective could you be trying to force your way through here, having to navigate these things if you were trying to do that fast. Also, from a combat, perspective, think about urban warfare and taking over houses or cities, and being able to sustainably do that. How far could you go moving as fast as you possibly could, and at what point do you actually become not that effective at moving quickly? So what you see here is, I think this is Israeli special forces just fighting from the threshold. They end up going in here and locating after they had already killed two guys, which I don't believe I have their bodies in this video. But one thing I just want you to kind of take note of is all of the smoke and all the effects that are happening inside of the structure and how that would affect your ability to process information, which I'll get to a little bit more of processing information here in a second. It almost looked like he was going to go in there and take that, which is the common thing after you throw a grenade, to go in there. I don't know if that was the plan. I don't know if he saw something, but it did look like he was going to step through and then hesitated. And I don't know per se with the Israeli weapon systems, but in the Marines, I carried the M249 squad automatic weapon, and it was a common teaching point and talking point that you're never the first one to enter a room with a belt-fed weapon, because they are prone to just not working sometimes in the moment when you need them. And so it really isn't advised. But again, I don't know, because I don't know their weapon systems. And so again, back to the video where they're shooting inside and now it's just covered with smoke. If you tried to enter into there, you're not seeing anything, right? So that's a problem. And what you're going to see is them entering at a certain point. A lot of these videos kind of start and stop. You don't really get to see from start to finish. But when they are in there, there is not a lot of smoke in there. So obviously they are more effective at being able to see things that they need to see.
Processor speed and what's important in gunfighting. It's my opinion, based on experience and talking to lots of people and being in this business for a long time, that shooting's only about 10% of gunfighting. The other 90% is everything else, all the decisions and judgments, all the situational awareness, everything that you need to do besides shoot.
So one of the things you guys have heard me talk about is, especially on the law enforcement side, winning or losing is more or less going to come down largely to where you're standing and why you're standing there. I've talked about before instances where officers were killed or downed, and the answer to that problem was more courses on a certain thing, but nobody questions why they were in there to begin with, right? Obviously, we have to be in certain places at certain times, and we can't help that. But what he gets into here is, my belief system as far as making good tactical decisions.
Is what's really important in a gunfight. The shooting is kind of the culmination of the fight. The core competency of gunfighting is processor speed, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of control over that. We are all born with a set processor speed. That's how fast our cerebral cortex will process information.
That's all I got. I know, super long video, but it is what it is. If you like this video, like this content, you want more of this kind of stuff, let me know about it in the comment sections. If you have any information to add to the video, you can also put that in the comment section.